Well, thanks very much, everybody, for being here. Ivo Bolson actually kind of set the tone of the day. I really loved the fact that this morning, one of the first things that he did was put up his hand and say that he was the champion for diversity. And so we're really looking forward to how we might be able to kind of enhance and increase that. And this next panel, I think, is really going to be representative of both diversity in our community, as well as, a diverse look and looking at AI hardware from a different perspective. Our next panel is really on the infrastructure issues that impact us all. And I know if you were here yesterday, we heard a number of different folks say that, the big bottlenecks for them was existing hardware off the shelf and then the infrastructure. So we're going to listen to a little bit today from our panel of experts on what they see coming for IoE, 5G, and everything that's going to keep us connected. Leading this panel is moderator Mario Tapia. Mario is probably best known for starting the Mobile Monday group in the Bay Area and the Mobile Monday Momentum Accelerator. His bona fides, though, go way back beyond that in the infrastructure and telecom space, and he actually even spent a little time and tenure as a rocket scientist at Lockheed, right? At Boeing. Okay, there you go. So please join me in welcoming Mario Tapia and our infrastructure panel.
All right. Well, thanks for everyone for coming in on day number 2. It's always good to see a good show up. So in this session we're gonna cover 5G. How many people know about 5G? Heard 5G? Is 6G better than 5G? I don't know. And also how about edge networks? So edge cloud. Folks familiar with edge cloud? Cool. For those that don't, we'll cover we'll cover those 2 topics in this session, and save your questions for the end. I think we'll have a couple of minutes to take in a couple of questions. But first, let's get started with the panel and introduce yourself. Where you've been working, what you've been working on, and let's get the intro.
Sure.
Go ahead, Jen.
Hi everyone. My name is Jen Gibbings, and I have been focused for the past 8-9 years on connected solutions, what therefore then became the Internet of Things, largely on the enterprise side of the house, working for Verizon as the IoT Director of Product Development. I've had the opportunity to work on some pretty cool things, from smart logistics and supply chain to ag tech to robotics to the first connected drone. So a lot of great things that have happened with 4G, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about 5G and what we're going to enable with that.
Great.
Good morning. My name is Rolf Muralt. I lead product at mobiledgex. We're a spin-off from Deutsche Telekom, so big German telco. We're based in the Valley, in the Bay Area, and we're really looking at sort of what is edge, who's it for, and essentially building an ecosystem with developers and also with infrastructure providers. So we work a lot with 5G telcos. So we're not specifically just working, obviously, with Deutsche Telekom. We're expanding and working with other operators as well.
Hi, my name is Heather Blanchard. I'm with Gsma. I focus largely on innovation strategy. Gsma is the world's largest telecom trade association. We have 750 members all around the world. We also have 300 ecosystem partners, many of whom are here today. And we support our members and their efforts in innovation. And a lot of what I do is try to figure out ways to be able to get many of you more funding, more access, and to be able to really drive the future of 5G as we're seeing it in edge computing.
Great, thanks everyone. Jen, we'll start with you.
Okay.
What is 5G, and if I'm in the IoT world, what does that mean to me?
Great question. So the Internet of Everything and the promise of the 4th Industrial Revolution which requires very high bandwidth and a lot of throughput, has the potential to really have a transformational impact on the way we work and the way we live. We're going to start to see the blurred lines between the physical and the digital, what's known as cyber physical, with use cases such as, and what we've talked about during the last day and a half here at the conference, of remote surgeries, autonomous vehicles, AR, VR, smart factories, smart cities, things that really require a lot of bandwidth, extremely low latency, and 5G has the promise, right, and I think the underlying word here we're highlighting is the promise of delivering bandwidth that are 1,000 times greater, speeds that are 100 times faster, and latencies that go from 50 milliseconds to 10 milliseconds and down to single digits. That transformation, however, requires significant changes on the network infrastructure. And so part of the promise is to deliver on that, there's got to be some enhancements. And so some of the focus right now for the telco industries is to deliver on that. And one of, I think, the greatest technology challenges right now is on the spectrum side. For those of you who understand and know 4G, you know that it is a low frequency spectrum. For 5G, it is a high frequency spectrum, millimeter wave technology. What that means is that where 4G actually can go through walls, it can go through foliage and trees, and can even bounce off of corners, right, and go around things, 5G and millimeter wave spectrum has a challenge. It doesn't go through walls. It doesn't bounce off of urban environments. And so because of that, there is a fundamental change in terms of how the network needs to be built. And that includes utilizing small cell technologies, about the size of coolers, picnic coolers. And what that allows for is densification in city environments. So you actually have to go low and tight when you're building this network, so that you're building the densification around the spaces in the cities where the utilization is needed. Unlike 4G today, where it's the high towers, right, that reach. I think in addition to what the promise of 5G can deliver and delivering on that spectrum, is that the value of the spectrum, for those of you who don't know, is that the high bandwidth spectrums are not being utilized right now. Not by the satellite communications, not by television. So there are huge amounts of the spectrum available, and that means that there will be a continuous rollout. And one of the things that's going to be happening, the FCC announced, is I believe it's December 10th or somewhere around the December timeframe. They're actually going to be selling off over 5 gigahertz of spectrum. 5 gigahertz. That's more spectrum that's being utilized right now by all mobile devices combined. Huge amounts, significant. But when you think about the challenges of the rollout, not only with the small cell technologies, you also have SDN, software-defined network, so network virtualization. That's something that came about through 4G, but also is important. And what that's going to enable is that if you allow software to take on some of the network work, right, so doing that work, it actually means for faster deployments. So while there are challenges on the network side, given the change in spectrum, the low frequency versus the high frequency, you also have rapid deployment opportunities with SDN. And then one other challenge I think that's important to mention, or in fact, let me mention two. One is the fiber optics component of 5G. Verizon has plans to roll out 37 million miles of fiber. That's a lot of fiber. In addition to that, you also have to talk about how we're going to take, and what really involves everyone in this audience in the interest of Hardwarecon is then getting that technology into the devices and allowing for the end user enablement component of it. So there's a lot of challenges, but the promise in the speeds, the ability to download an HD video in seconds versus a half of a minute is huge. So going from 10 gigabits of a throughput, or getting to 10 gigabits of throughput, is I think huge, and I think it has could radically change the way we do business and the way we live.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Rolf. So, what's edge cloud computing, and expand a little bit, like how does 5G play into, because they're two complementary technologies.
Yep.
So expand a little bit about, tell us all what mobiledgex is doing.
Okay. Yep.
How the company got started, what the technology you're working on, and then how it relates into 5G.
Yeah, sure. So basically, edge is between the device and the cloud, right? So Jen gave some interesting numbers. So I'll add a few of my own to it. So if you look at there's a handful billion devices on the one hand. There is about a $300 billion total investment that's gone in on the cloud side. So that's Amazon, that's the Google, that's Microsoft. In between those two, right, is essentially infrastructure that is about a $1.7 trillion investment, right? So massively higher. That's mostly used for transport. If you look a little bit within that $1.7 trillion, historically about 10 to 15% of that has gone into general compute. So that's your HP servers to go and run some of the messaging systems. Through 4G LTE, and now interestingly with 5G, that slice of general compute has actually gone up. So it's actually going up to about $600 billion. So there's a lot more compute capacity. The reason for that is these virtualized transport transformations the telcos have embarked on, the SDN, the NFVI initiatives, have really decoupled some of the functions that used to be tied to fixed form factor appliances and made those into software workloads. And so 5G is obviously a huge transition. It's a huge investment. We'll talk a little bit about maybe some of the revenue opportunities. But the good news with that is when comes time to do 6G, for a lot of the control plane, it's just going to be a software upgrade. So that's kind of the magnitude of the investments. And so when we looked at the space, we sort of decided that the missing piece of edge was the ability to have an aggregator of that $600 billion of compute capacity that's going to be out there, and be able to then expose that through a marketplace, right? So basically a very simple API. Historically, if you've been a Netflix, you've been able to work with telcos and place your workloads closer to the end user, but you had to be a certain size. And so we've seen a lot of companies that are, a lot of them in the mobile gaming space, so we work pretty closely with Niantic, which is the maker of the Pokemon Go game, in terms of being able to sort of expose some of these assets to much smaller players. We see an emergence of new applications as well. So I think in the keynote, that was something that was mentioned quite a bit. So essentially, there's a lot more of a focus on augmented reality, mixed reality, right? On the gaming front, it used to be that the game was sort of this single-player experience, right? There's kind of like this cartoon type on the display that was you. A lot of the game makers are looking to move to a lot more player versus player, multiplayer, more collaborative, more social, bigger scale things, mixing the digital with the physical. So kind of taking the cartoon type thing, but then also blending in with what your camera sees. So the second you do all of that, latency becomes a huge factor, right? And so you do need to have some capability of synchronizing state between multiple devices the edge is a great place to do that state synchronization, but it has to do it at sort of a 20 to 25 millisecond range of latency, which is sort of like the eye to brain coordination that you have. And so that's really what we've focused on. So we've also worked a lot with the device makers. We see a whole new generation of devices that are going to come about. The wearables, the smart glasses, autonomous vehicles are really just a class of new devices as well. And so the good news is, as we think we solve some of these problems for maybe mobile gaming, mixed reality, the same solutions are going to play in industrial IoT. They're going to play in robots on the factory floor. They're going to, I don't know what's going on with my microphone. They're going to play with sort of drone swarming and some of these other next generation applications. So I think it's a really interesting time to be in networking, and especially in mobile networking, just because of the magnitude of these transformations and the impact they have on the applications, right? So in our view, it's not really so much about the infrastructure, it's really about the better experience for the application user.
So and so for folks in IoT hardware, so and they need the connectivity.
Yep.
And they also need some of the compute power. Elaborate on a couple of use cases where hardware needs local compute. The compute power needs to be closer. In addition, kind of with that high bandwidth, how
right. So lots of video, right?
Yeah.
4K video, right?
Yeah.
Lots more data being generated. And now with 5G, the end device will be able to go from, so today on 4G LTE, you can get 50 megs that are about, the device can do about 100 megs. That's going to move to 1 gigabit per second, right? 4K video, a lot of bandwidth, and historically, the bottleneck and the precious resource from a telco point of view has always been the downstream, right? On the upstream, we haven't had to date that much stuff that's come back, but IoT will dramatically change that, right? So it's the video, but it's also just the machine-to-machine data. And so if you need to bring that back all the way to central place, not only is it a latency impact, but it's also just the fact that you're bringing in a lot of data that could be simplified to metadata, right? So with a lot of computer vision, right, ML sort of workloads, bring those to the edge and essentially decrease the stress on the infrastructure. As Jen mentioned, with 5G, we're going to see 10 times as many cell locations, base stations, just because of the different characteristics from the penetration of the airwave point of view, right? So we get this much more distributed edge. We can take advantage of it to take the stress away from the core.
Got it. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how 3G, LTE, 4G technologies and centralized cloud, how that has changed our world in the last decade. And yeah, very eager to see what 5G and Edge are going to bring to us.
Right. Yeah, the rise of cloud has really been about sort of the Web 2.0 apps, right, and the right backends for smartphones, right. If you go back 15 years ago, right, it was mostly sort of batch processing for Web 2.0, right. Amazon EC2 initially started out as essentially a batch processing system, and so we basically see an evolution of that. But as you distribute this cloud compute infrastructure from maybe 50 points of presence around the globe for some of the web scale cloud providers, you go to tens, hundreds, a million of those. You need to have a very different software framework to be able to expose that in a way that's simple and consumable to the application developer, right? The cell technology is pretty alien to the application developers, so you really need to have an abstraction layer on top of that.
And I think network slicing, part of the new infrastructure that's being built, is going to help with that, in that telcos are going to be able to actually portion certain parts of the network with a guaranteed reliability and availability for these type of huge bandwidth throughput needs for use cases and unknown products and services and applications that we haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah, I mean, like 10 years ago, could you come up with, what do we take for granted today? Streaming on our devices, on-demand cabs, on-demand food. There's a lot of things that we do today that 10 years are like, wow, I never really thought we would, exactly. And then it's 10 years from now, it'll be self-driving cars and I'll have my own autonomous a drone that goes and picks up my deliveries. I mean, something, yeah.
People forget about the days of 1G and 2G when it was just about literally getting a phone call anywhere, just how precious that was, right? And then 3G that brought the text messaging layer, and 4G that brought the data communications component. 5G is going to, I think, be transformational as well.
Yeah, new business opportunities. Yeah. Heather, so tell us about, so what is GSMA? Tell us a little bit about the association, and then also because of your global perspective, what's the innovation in the industry doing as a whole on the global scale?
Sure.
Kind of expand there.
Sure. GSMA, we're one of the largest telecom trade associations. We're headquartered in London. I'm kind of one of their outposts here in Silicon Valley. I look after a lot on the global innovation side. So what are the priorities of global mobile operators all around the world? I can tell you that IoT is a top 3 priority, if not for some markets, number 1. And so I think that when we start, what we're seeing, interestingly enough, network slicing is very interesting for us. Also, we're seeing globally this interest of, depending on where you're at, this unbundling software from hardware. And that seems to be something that is very big out here, and it's kind of making its rounds around the world. And that's a phenomenon that's kind of moving the business model dynamics a bit. But I like to really kind of focus for us, on the innovation side, is really opening doors, and opening access, being able to kind of work with our members to be able to open new opportunities for innovators from around the world. We also definitely want to promote more funding, venture funding, for these projects, not just from our industry, but from folks here up in Sand Hill Road, because we all are in it together. And I think that with the promise of 5G, it has really, I don't think I've ever seen in the US really the almost a mega trend kind of take off. And lately I've been hearing a lot here of like, well, with network slicing, that's interesting. As we move into a more software-defined universe, a lot of people, especially right here in Silicon Valley, are going to really be thinking about new ways to provide connectivity. We're seeing new business models being created. So a lot of what we're thinking about is on the strategy side, because I sit on our strategy team, is what are those opportunities? How do we understand what's happening on the front lines of innovation? How do we get and encourage more investment in operator priorities? We also want to be able to get global mobile operator priorities out into the innovation hubs around the world, because we believe that innovation doesn't just happen here in Silicon Valley. It's all over, and that's why this place is so wonderful, because there's so many people from all over the world here. But we see amazing things happening all over. We like bringing that here as well, especially for our investor community and our members. So we're here in a way to kind of help amplify and to help be able to drive and close the distance. And so we have a program called the GSMA 100. This is really focused on being able to open new doors. For example, like if mobiledgex is a part of the GSMA 100, and basically what we do is we do a bunch of BD meetings for folks. If you're working with a mobile operator now, or you'd like to, we try to open the doors even further, and are able to basically be able to promote your use cases to a global audience. So if you're here and you have a product and you're already working with a mobile operator, I'd love to talk to you.
Cool, great. I want to talk about use cases with this upcoming infrastructure, and also kind of gauge, where are we going to be at in 5 years from now? So 5 years from now, what does the network look like, deployment look like? What does the edge cloud deployment look like? And then how can an audience of hardware, startups, hardware manufacturers, folks in the ecosystem, how are they going to be able to leverage this new infrastructure that's rolling out? So, I mean, maybe Jen, you can tell us a little bit more about 5G rollout time plans, at least for North America. What do we expect? And then maybe Rolf, you can chime in on what are we looking at, from edge computing point of view, what's out there?
Sure. Well, 2 weeks ago, Verizon announced the rollout of 5G in 2 markets, so Minneapolis and Chicago. Now, these are districts within the city, but that is a huge step forward, meaning it's happening. And I think it's going to be kind of a slow rollout. The goal for the industry is to be in 90 markets by the end of the year. So there's going to be significant work that's going to roll into the following years, right? I think that in 5 years from now, hopefully where we'll be is having conquered a large portion of the challenges around the customer or the end user enablement component, right? So getting the chipsets, the 5G chipsets into the actual devices. That I see as kind of the long roadmap. I think over the next 2 years, you're gonna see the rollout of the technology. You're gonna see a lot of testing of the technology. In fact, based on some of the data that we're seeing right now in the markets where we've already launched, where Verizon's already launched, is that we're seeing, close to or 800 megabytes per second. So not quite the 1 gig just there. So there's going to be some fine tuning that's going to need to happen along with these rollouts. Right now we actually have, or Verizon has, 4 what are called smart homes or 5G enabled homes. So there's things that are happening on the enterprise side of the house to really drive that adoption along on the consumer side. And the key is around ecosystem partnership. I think that concept of you can't do it all yourself started with 4G, and it absolutely is the case for 5G. So it's going to take extreme amount of partnerships, not only within the business communities, but within the local governments and the federal. And I think one of the bigger challenges globally, and perhaps Heather, you might be able to speak to this, is that there's different spectrum and different regulations within each country that need to be established. And I think that hopefully over the next 5 years, what we're going to see is everyone coming together to kind of build this framework where everyone is kind of working from the same playbook. I think that's going to be critical so that you can actually leverage this technology and go across borders, right? That's really the vision of the Internet of Everything, is not having to stay within specific country lines, but a product being able to track something anywhere around the globe, regardless of where it is. And that really requires some standardization as well. So the good news is that it's happening. You're going to see a lot this year, and I think over the next coming months. I think with the FCC rollout of the additional spectrum at the end of the year, you're going to see even more happening into the following years. But 5 years out, I'm hopeful that we've conquered some of the challenges around the end user enablement component, and we start to really see the proliferation of 5G out there in devices.
Got it. And Rolf, on 5 years from now, what are we?
Yeah, so I think for most of the operators, a bullet point they've always had kind of in these 5G vision slides has always been to open it up to third parties, right? Which is kind of what you're mentioning as well. We also had some learnings that were kind of maybe a bit unexpected in the last year or so. So we actually have seen that the workloads that seem to be a good match to the edge require a lot more accelerators. So whether it be GPU or DNN or other forms of acceleration. And so one of the activities that we've sort of started to focus on is, as we wait for some standards to emerge, can we work with some of the other people from the OEM side with the operators on essentially blueprints? And so we've been working with Juniper, for example, or Cisco as well, on some blueprints that basically would allow us to take better advantage of this end-to-end network slicing. So a lot of what we want to provide is in this marketplace of matching the application's demands to what the backend can provide, because the backends are a lot more heterogeneous than they are in the central cloud. So in the central cloud, every rack looks the same. It's a very small number of SKUs. as we're aggregating mobile operators' infrastructure, we have a lot sort of wider dynamic range of capabilities, and so that marketplace needs to be able to do that matching. And so working with operators and developers at the same time on essentially blueprints of what this SLA, right? What is this dialogue, right, that the app can have with the operator that is now making some of these APIs open, essentially. We've also packaged some APIs that were sort of laying around within some of the operator networks, like location verification. So for example, when you play Pokemon Go, you're supposed to go to a specific location, but it's very easy to spoof the location, the GPS location of your device. So for a company like Niantic, that's about a $10 to $12 million potential loss per year, right, of people essentially cheating the process. So just making that a standard API call. Every operator has a little bit of a different backend for location verification and finding out which cell phone tower the device is connected to, but we can deal with that, right? So abstract that, add a layer, abstract that, expose it as a single common API. Similar things for network slicing and quality of experience.
Very cool. Heather?
I think this is the common theme that you're hearing here is that the industry is going to really be focused on partnership. I mean, there's just no way forward. It is partnership. And I think that you're going to see an industry transform itself into a partnership, software-driven industry. I think it's going to take on a new and emerging cultures inside and outside. I think that there's going to be a lot of places where smaller companies, a diverse set of new suppliers are going to be coming into the market. So I think that you're going to really see kind of almost like a renaissance in a way. And I'm actually, it's you're saying this is a great time to be in the industry. It really is. I mean, when you see like what Linux has been doing and the Telecom Infra Project, Open Networking Foundation, it really is pretty exciting what a lot of the entrepreneurship around the network is going to be, and I can't imagine what it's really going to be when a lot of the tools are going to be exposed. And once a lot of those tools really focused on the API side are exposed, I think that's really when you're going to see kind of an exponential just uplift. And so I'm actually really I'm really excited. It's a great time to be part of the industry.
Cool. Thanks, Heather. I want to take a couple of questions from the audience. Raise your hand. Are there any out there?
Question in the back?
Oh yeah, far back here. If you could please stand, and then.
So John, quick question about the commercialization of 5G. So right now, probably a bottleneck for a lot of devices is who's going to pay monthly service fee to get a device on the carrier's network. I have about 25 devices at home that's connected to my Wi-Fi, but I only have my phone on the upside. And through mobility, you're talking about opportunity. Companies like Tile, Fitbit come to mind. I would love to piggyback on 5G, but who's going to pay for that? Do you think with 5G coming on board, there's a way to sort of change the business model a bit so it's not just $9.99 for every other new device you add upside the phone to your account?
So the question is, with 5G, who's going to pay for this connectivity, especially for IoT devices like Tile, and I think I have like one of the automotive things that goes, the dongle that goes in the car. Who's going to pay for that data, right? That's the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Access.
Well, I'll start off, and then please feel free to add comments. So think of right now as the network on 4G being a 3-lane highway, and now think of 5G as a 10 times that size of a highway. I mean, the capacity there is huge. And then the ability to actually do the network slicing component means that they're going to be able to give individual companies certain access, again, with reliability and availability. And for those that need the high bandwidth, right, they're going to offset some of those costs, while some of the IoT solutions that just send, very small, right, kilobits of data, right, are going to be at the other spectrum. So I think absolutely what this is enabling operators to do is to create an entire new kind of service model. And I think that you're going to see some big changes coming there as well.
Yeah, changes in the business model on a more of transactional basis, and this is really when the industry will need to kind of come together and be able to have some of those interoperable services and being able to really kind of unlock some of those. I really think that we're close, and I think that as 5G rolls out and as more of this gets exposed, those companies are going to be able to kind of do that partnership. And I think that I'd also like to think that, as we go into this, there's going to be sandbox areas. And I think that operators are going to end up being able to kind of transform some of their innovation presence and focus on being able to provide some sandboxing for this. So Fitbit can to come in and test. That's a lot of what the operators here. Did you know that Silicon Valley is the largest concentration of mobile operators on the planet? There's probably about 40 here. And a lot of what they have here are their network testing services. So, as they have these 5G test beds, this is exactly why they're here. They want you to come in. They want you to work with their product teams. And if you need access, just look me up. I'm happy to, be able to get you in. But the other thing is that the industry has people all over the world really wanting to kind of talk to all the entrepreneurs and the product development guys. So, as we kind of move forward, I think it's going to be just really great.
And real quick, if I could just do a quick plug on the sandboxing and an opportunity to potentially make up to $1 million. Verizon is actually doing a challenge. If you go to their 5G lab, they are putting a challenge out there for the newest ideas, right? How to make 5G come to life. So submit your product, your services, your application ideas, and you could potentially win up to $1 million. So talk about sandboxing and making money at the same time.
Cool.
So,
Rolf, do you want to plug the hackathon?
Yeah, sure, I was gonna say, but now Jen's talked about $1 million, right? So Mari only have $7,000, but we're doing a hackathon on the 30th at Facebook, so it's within the telecom infra projects facilities. So it's got a full edge set up to essentially interact with our APIs. We're only looking for about 10 to 15 people, so I guess your odds of walking away with a few grand are pretty good. So let me know if there's interest. We're essentially looking to just test out some of the other use cases that we have explored. So we've mostly focused on mobile gaming, but now we're starting to be a little bit more interested in the IoT side, for example.
Well, that's we're out of time. So round of applause, Jen, Rolf, Heather, thank you so much.